Hi guys, as you may already know, the April update in Rust has brought us some poker, which made me pretty happy since I have quite a bit of experience in playing poker for an average Rust player. Some of the people might think that poker is all about luck, but in reality you don't really need much luck to make profit, since poker is all about math and strategy. In this video, I'm going to explain the basic rules and strategy in order to win at poker in Rust. So there are two main types of Texas Hold'em poker, tournaments and cash games. The main difference being that in a tournament you're buying in for a certain amount to enter and you play until you win or lose it all, and around 10 to 20% of the players that last the longest get some of the prize pool and the first places get the most of it. In a cash game, however, you play and bet from real money, in this case scrap, and you can enter or leave at any time with your winnings. In Rust, we will be playing cash game. I'm personally a tournament player, but the strategy behind it doesn't differ too much. So for credibility, I will show you some of my personal real money poker history and experience. So I have played around 1000 low limit tournaments in two different poker sites and I have more than 2600 euros profit in total. Here you can see the timeline graph with some of my bigger wins. I play up to 6 different tables simultaneously. One tournament takes from 1 to 8 hours to finish. I'm not a professional, but I did have some coaching from high winning poker experts. In Rust, on the third day of wipe in an official server, I managed to get from 400 to almost 3000 scrap in less than 2 hours. On the next day, I earned 1500 more by playing half an hour. Now I am going to briefly explain the basic rules for poker. In order to play poker in Rust, you need at least 100 scrap to enter. However, I would not recommend to start playing with less than 300 scrap, and I will explain why later in the video. So, the main goal of poker is to make the best 5-card poker combination possible, by using 2 individual cards and 5 cards which are later displayed on the table. Here you can see a full poker hand ranking from highest to lowest, the best combination being Royal Flush, which is extremely rare and I believe I've only gotten it once in my life. The worst combination is a high card, where no real combinations can be seen. If you want to play poker, you should know these combinations perfectly, just like your Reiki spray. So feel free to pause the video and read through it. Every player has his own position at the table, with dealer being the best position since his turn is almost always last. So he has the most information on what has happened before putting in any scrap. The game is mainly divided into two main parts, pre-flop and post-flop, with the flop being the first 3 cards revealed on the table. Player indicated by SB is small blind and has to put a forced bet 5 scrap. Big blind puts double the amount, 10 scrap. Because of the forced bets, small blind and big blind go last pre-flop but first post-flop, making them the worst positions to be in. The first person to start is then the one after big blind, and it goes on like that. During his turn, player has 3 options: fold, meaning to not play this hand anymore and not lose any more scrap; call, match the highest bet made yet, which in this case is 10 scrap; or bet/raise, increase the highest bet by a certain amount. By going all in, you increase the bet with all of your scrap. If nobody bets more than 10 scrap, the big blind instead of calling has an option to check, because he has 10 scrap invested already. Whenever everyone has had their say, there was no raising done, the first 3 cards, referred as the flop, will be shown. Postflop has similar options, but if no raising was done, everyone can check and pass his turn to the next player. If all players check, the 4th card, referred as the turn, will be shown. If someone has bet on the flop, then all players have to either call the bet to see the next card, fold if they do not want to invest any more money, or raise if they want to increase the amount even more. The total amount invested in the pot is shown in the center. This is the winnings that you will take if you win this hand. As you see in my example, everyone has checked. Whenever the turn is revealed, same actions are repeated, and then the last card, called the river, gets shown. At this point, players have their last chance to place more bets and increase the size of the pot. As you see here, I have bet 35 scrap, which made the 2 players fold, meaning that they give up on this hand, and 1 player call, where he had added 35 scrap as well to have a chance to win the pot at showdown. As you see here, he had only 1 pair compared to my 2 pairs, so he has made the wrong decision by calling. At this point, the hand has finished, and new will start in a few seconds. Anyone can leave or add more scrap at that time. So the only way to win the pot is to either have better combination than your opponents at the end or make everyone else fold. In the next hand, positions will move one spot, meaning that if you were a big blind, you will then be small blind and so on. If you have never played poker before and still don't understand how this game works, then you can also watch some other basic poker tutorials where they go more in depth. So at this point, I assume that you have a basic understanding on how to play poker, and I will reflect on the strategy. First of all, it is important to note that your playing strategy and card range should be adjusting according to the amount of players you're playing against. The more players there are on the table, the more careful and with better cards you should be playing, because this means that with more people there is a greater chance of someone else having a good hand. What do good cards actually mean? Well, there are a few different types of good cards. The ones that flop well are suited connectors, like 3-4 suited to 10-9 suited, are good, but you shouldn't overestimate them. I tried to use them to catch straight or a flush, but be careful if you catch a small pair. Be aware that someone might have a higher pair than that. Two high cards, like Ace King, Ace Queen, Ace Jack, King Queen, or Queen Jack. These type of cards are especially good because they provide a strong kicker. A kicker is a card in poker hand that does not itself take part in determining the rank of the hand, but may be used to break ties between hands of the same rank. Meaning that when you have an Ace King and you catch an ace on the board, King is your kicker. If there is another person with an ace, you will most likely win against him because of a better kicker. Pocket pairs from 2-2 to Ace-Ace can be very profitable, with Ace-Ace to Jack-Jack being the most profitable and best cards in the game. The lower pairs do not flop very well, but they are very good pre-flop. If you get it all in pre-flop, you have at least 50% chance of winning against any hand unless it is a higher pocket. They are also good to try and catch 3 of a kind, aka sets, because there is around 12% chance that you will catch a 3 of a kind on the flop. Random aces are also decent if you play against fewer opponents. However, lower aces like ace 2 to ace 6 do not flop very well. So let's get to the interesting part. How do I play pre-flop? The first thing you need to do when you start playing it is estimate how many big blinds do all the opponents have, including yourself. 100 scrap is 10 big blinds. If there is at least one player who has more than 25 big blinds, meaning 250 scrap, and hasn't folded yet, then you can play in the following way. Let's look at the following example from my previous hand. As you see, we are three-handed, where one player has more than 200 scrap and the other one almost 500. I have 2-5 suited, which means that both cards are from the same suit, clubs. What most of the players would do in my situation is call the 10 scrap, which is probably the worst thing you can do in this situation. Calling here is called limping, and is the main way of recognizing if the player is not very good at the game. The only time you could limp is if you have a decent flopping but not too good cards and there have been already players limping before you. What you should do here in the most times when you play from positions that are not small blind or big blind is raise. I prefer to raise up to 2.5 to 3 big blinds pre-flop and do it with all my cards to never reveal the strength of it. When you raise, you have a chance to win the pot right away without even having to look at the flop and eliminate opponents that are trying to see some cheap flops with bad cards. In this case, I bet 30 scrap and both of the opponents call. The standard thing to do after the flop is to check to the aggressor, who has bet pre-flop. My opponents select to do that here. Now, as an aggressor in this situation, you have a chance to do a so-called continuation bet, also known as c-bet. I tend to c-bet pretty often, depending on the amount of players left and my predictions whether the players have hit something on the flop. The sizing of the bet should be from 30 to 50% of the current pot. In our example, I elect to do a small c-bet of 25 scrap to protect my hand because I've gotten a pair of 5s and want to get rid of the players that have higher cards like Queen Jack or King 10 and so on, that did not hit the flop but might have a chance to catch something on the turn. that would beat me. One of the opponents elects to fold and the other one calls. On the turn we see that I hit second pair of twos, which is pretty lucky for me. My opponent checks to me and I elect to do one more value bet of 70 scrap, which is 50% of the pot. If I would not have hit the second pair in this situation, then I would be checking, because in a normal situation only better hands like a pair of sixes and a pair of aces will be calling me, so there would be no profit to be gained. In this case my opponent calls here again and we see an inconsequential queen on the river. At this point I assume that I have a better hand by the way my opponent played, unless he got lucky by having an ace queen, and I do a value bet of 140 scrap, which is again half of the pot. The guy calls and has only a king high. At this point he is just giving away free scrap. The correct play for him would be either re-raising me pre-flop, or if he elects to call pre-flop, which is also okay, then folding on the flop or turn. Keep in mind that in Rust, cards are shown to other players when you win. In real poker, you do not have to show your cards. For that reason, make sure to switch your gameplay if you are playing against the same people for a long time. So, what is the takeaway from this hand? First, start the action by raising before the flop when you have a decent hand instead of calling. Second, if you bet post flop, try to size your bets around 30 to 70% of the current pot. You could also sometimes do pot size bets, but you should have a good reasoning for it. 3. While playing in a standard way like this, you need to maximize your profit. For all the bets I used 265 scrap in total. Therefore, as I mentioned before in the video, I do not recommend playing with less than 300 scrap. But what if you do lose some of your money down to 100 scrap and still want to play, or if your opponents only have less than 150 scrap? Then almost all you need to do is press A for all in or F for fold, because then you should be playing the math and use probability theory instead of playing poker. Since you do not have ability to do a triple barrel bet post flop, you should be putting all in pre-flop whenever you get better hands. So, what are good hands in this case? Here you can see the table based on math, where it is shown what cards you should be going all in with and from which position depending on the big blinds. On the left you can see the amount of big blinds, to the right of it the positions. Cutoff, hijack, mid position 1 are the positions before the dealer. To the right you can see the cards. X in here is any card, O is offsuit meaning different suit, and S is suited. This table assumes that there are no bets made before you and all players in previous positions have folded. However, if there are some limpers before you, then move yourself one position higher per every player. I will now show you some quick clips how these situations play out in the game. You guys wanna gamble?
Fold it in, man. Big game, I like. Oh, he's back, the legend.
So that is it for this video. If you did find it useful and want me to cover some other hands that you may have encountered or do not know how to play them, make sure to mention it down below.